The spiral of echoes. Close your eyes and listen. Can you hear it? The whisper of wind across ancient stones, the gentle murmur of secrets buried beneath time itself. Tonight, we descend into the deepest chambers of human memory, where shadows dance with forgotten light and silence holds the weight of vanished worlds. Imagine, if you will, a civilization so ancient that it existed before the last great ice, before the floods that drowned continents, before even the oldest myths began. A people who watched the same stars you see tonight, who loved, built, and dreamed beneath skies that have witnessed the rise and fall of countless worlds. They left no names, no monuments that time could not erase. Yet somehow, impossibly, their echoes remain. In the highlands of Tibet, archaeologists have found metal tools of impossible precision, crafted 150,000 years ago. In the depths of ancient caves, geometric patterns repeat across continents as if drawn by the same invisible hand. These are not coincidences. They are whispers from a spiral of time that turns eternal, carrying fragments of knowledge through the endless night. Tonight, we follow these echoes backward through the spiral, deeper into the mystery of who we truly are and what we have forgotten. Let the ancient darkness embrace you as we begin. High on the windswept plateaus of Tibet, where ancient glaciers carved their stories into stone, something impossible waits in the darkness. At 14,000 feet above sea level, where the air grows thin and the silence profound, archaeologists working in the shadow of the Himalayas have uncovered artifacts that challenge everything we thought we knew about human history. Dr. Elena Vasquez first noticed them during a routine excavation near the Tibetan-Chinese border. Metallic objects gleaming dully in the permafrost, their surfaces bearing an otherworldly precision. When her team carefully extracted the first piece, a perfectly balanced cutting tool no larger than a human palm, she knew immediately that something was wrong. Not wrong in the sense of contamination or misplaced modern debris, but wrong in the way that makes your skin crawl and your mind recoil from implications too vast to grasp. The metal was an alloy. Copper and tin worked together with a sophistication that shouldn't exist for another 140,000 years. The edges held a sharpness that could still split paper, despite being buried beneath layers of sediment that geological dating placed at 150,000 years old. The craftsmanship spoke of not just intelligence, but of a manufacturing tradition, of knowledge passed down through generations, of a civilization that had mastered metallurgy when mainstream archaeology insists humans were barely learning to control fire. But Tibet was only the beginning. 3,000 miles to the northwest, in the remote Ural Mountains where Russia bleeds into Kazakhstan, another team made discoveries that would shatter the comfortable boundaries of accepted history. Professor Mikhail Petrov's expedition, originally searching for Paleolithic cave art, instead found themselves staring at a collection of bronze implements buried in strata that predated the Bronze Age by an incomprehensible margin. The tools were not crude hammers or simple scrapers, but sophisticated instruments. Precision ground cutting edges, perfectly balanced throwing implements, and most disturbing of all, what appeared to be surgical instruments with microscopic serrations that suggested an understanding of medicine and anatomy far beyond anything attributed to early humans. Carbon dating of the surrounding organic material confirmed what the geological layers had already whispered. These artifacts were impossibly old, older than the earliest known civilizations by factors that made seasoned archaeologists question their own sanity. Dr. Petrov, a man who had spent 30 years reconstructing the lives of Ice Age hunters, found himself holding tools that belonged in a modern laboratory. The metal composition revealed trace elements and alloy ratios that required not just advanced smelting techniques, but an understanding of chemistry that shouldn't have existed until the Industrial Revolution. Each piece bore microscopic tool marks suggesting machine precision, yet they emerged from sediments deposited when mammoths still roamed the earth, when Homo sapiens were supposedly struggling to survive in scattered tribes. The scientific community's reaction was swift and predictable. Denial, followed by accusations of contamination, then desperate attempts to explain away what couldn't be explained. Yet as more sites yielded similar anomalies across the Tibetan Plateau and Ural Range, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. These weren't isolated incidents or laboratory errors. They were breadcrumbs leading back to a civilization that had somehow mastered advanced metallurgy when our ancestors were supposedly living in caves and hunting with sharpened sticks. What made the discoveries even more unsettling was their distribution. The artifacts weren't randomly scattered, but appeared to follow ancient trade routes, as if these impossible tools had once moved along established networks of commerce and communication. Isotope analysis revealed that the metals had been mined from sources hundreds of miles apart, then transported and worked at centralized locations. Evidence of organization, planning, and cooperation on a scale that challenged every assumption about prehistoric human capability. Dr. Vasquez still remembers the moment she held the first complete implement. A delicate instrument that seemed designed for precision work, its surface bearing what appeared to be deliberately etched markings. Under magnification, those marks revealed themselves as a form of notation, symbols arranged in mathematical sequences that suggested not just intelligence, but abstract thought. Someone 150,000 years ago had been counting, measuring, recording. Someone had been thinking in ways we'd assumed impossible for early humans. The implications rippled through the archaeological world like shockwaves through still water. If these tools were genuine, and every test confirmed their authenticity, then human civilization didn't begin with agriculture 10,000 years ago, or even with the mysterious monuments of Göbekli Tepe 11,500 years ago. It began in the mists of deep time, when ice sheets covered half the world and our species was supposedly struggling for its very survival. But perhaps most haunting of all was what the tools represented. Not just advanced technology, but the ghostly outline of minds capable of innovation, planning, and artistic expression. These weren't the desperate scrapings of survivors, but the confident work of craftsmen who understood their materials, who had time to perfect their techniques, who lived in societies stable enough to support specialization and trade. The artifacts spoke of workshops where masters taught apprentices, of trade networks spanning continents, of communities prosperous enough to invest in tools that served no immediate survival function but represented pure technological achievement. They whispered of a world we never knew existed, populated by people whose thoughts and dreams had been lost to time's relentless erosion. Yet if the Tibetan highlands and Ural mountains held such secrets, what other impossibilities might be waiting in the Earth's deeper layers? As Dr. Vasquez carefully catalogued each artifact, she couldn't shake the feeling that these tools were merely the beginning, fragments of a much larger puzzle scattered across the planet, waiting for someone patient enough to piece together the shattered mirror of our forgotten past. The metal tools from Tibet and the Urals were just the beginning. Whispers that led to shouts echoing across continents. As word of the impossible discoveries spread through archaeological networks, researchers began examining their own collections with fresh eyes, and what they found defied every comfortable assumption about our ancient past. In laboratories across the world, forgotten pottery fragments gathered dust in storage rooms suddenly became the focus of intense scrutiny. Dr. Sarah Chen at the Stanford Archaeological Institute was the first to notice it. Geometric patterns etched into ceramic shards that had been collected decades earlier from sites spanning from Peru to Papua New Guinea. Under the harsh light of her examination table, these seemingly random decorative elements revealed themselves as something far more profound. The patterns were identical, not similar, not influenced by trade or cultural exchange, but mathematically identical, down to precise angular measurements and proportional relationships. Spirals that maintained perfect golden ratios, geometric tessellations that demonstrated advanced understanding of mathematical principles, and most disturbing of all, symbolic notations that appeared to represent astronomical calculations. These weren't the random doodles of primitive pottery makers. They were the careful inscriptions of mathematicians who understood concepts that wouldn't be discovered by human civilization for another 100,000 years. Using cutting-edge luminescence dating techniques, Dr. Chen's team began the painstaking process of determining exactly when these ceramics had been fired. The optically stimulated luminescence method measures the last time quartz crystals in the clay were exposed to sunlight. The results that emerged from Dr. Chen's luminescence analysis sent tremors through the scientific community. Ceramic fragments from sites separated by thousands of miles and supposedly different time periods all registered dates clustering around 140,000 to 150,000 years ago, the same impossible time frame as the Tibetan metal tools. But it was the uranium-thorium dating of mineral deposits within the pottery that delivered the final, devastating blow to conventional archaeology. The technique, which measures the decay of uranium isotopes trapped within the ceramic matrix during firing, confirmed what many had feared to acknowledge. These weren't isolated anomalies or dating errors. They represented a global phenomenon, a ceramic tradition that had somehow flourished across continents during a period when mainstream science insisted humans were barely capable of creating crude stone implements. Professor James Whitfield from Oxford's Archaeological Research Centre led the effort to map these discoveries, and what emerged was a pattern that defied explanation. From the Andes to the Australian outback, from Siberian tundra to African highlands, identical geometric motifs appeared on pottery fragments dated to the same narrow window of deep time. The mathematical precision was breathtaking. Spiral patterns that followed Fibonacci sequences, tessellating shapes that demonstrated knowledge of complex geometric principles, and astronomical alignments that suggested the pottery makers understood celestial mechanics with startling accuracy. Most unsettling were the firing techniques themselves. Spectroscopic analysis revealed that these ancient ceramics had been heated to temperatures exceeding 1,200 degrees Celsius, requiring controlled furnace technology that wouldn't be developed by known civilizations until the Bronze Age. The advanced firing techniques revealed an even deeper mystery. These weren't the products of accidental discovery or primitive trial-and-error experimentation. The ceramics showed evidence of controlled atmospheric conditions during firing, alternating oxidizing and reducing environments that created specific chemical reactions within the clay matrix. This level of technological sophistication required not just advanced furnace design, but a profound understanding of chemistry and material science. Dr. Elena Rodriguez from the Madrid Institute of Archaeological Sciences made perhaps the most startling discovery when she analyzed clay compositions from sites across 3 continents. The pottery hadn't been made from local materials, as would be expected from isolated primitive communities. Instead, isotope signatures revealed that clays had been transported hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles from their source locations. Evidence of trade networks spanning continents during an era when such connections were thought impossible. But the true revelation came when researchers began examining the geometric patterns not as decorative elements, but as functional notation systems. Mathematical anthropologist Dr. Michael Thornton recognized the patterns as sophisticated encoding methods, ways of preserving and transmitting complex mathematical and astronomical knowledge without written language. The spirals encoded planetary orbital periods, the tessellations preserved geometric theorems, and the angular measurements recorded precise stellar positions that corresponded to sky maps from 150,000 years ago. The implications were staggering. These weren't random cultural artifacts, but components of a vast information storage system. A prehistoric internet of knowledge encoded in clay and distributed across the ancient world through trade networks of breathtaking scope and sophistication. The ceramic fragments painted a picture of a world that should not have existed, a global civilization operating with mathematical precision and technological sophistication that dwarfed anything in the accepted archaeological record. Each new discovery added another piece to an impossible puzzle. A pottery tradition that spanned continents, encoded advanced knowledge, and operated through trade networks of staggering complexity, all during an era when humans were supposedly struggling for basic survival. What made the findings even more extraordinary was their sudden disappearance from the archaeological record. The ceramic tradition, with all its mathematical sophistication and global distribution, seemed to vanish entirely around 140,000 years ago, as if an entire civilization had simply evaporated from existence. The pottery fragments represented not gradual cultural evolution, but the remnants of a fully formed technological society that had somehow been erased from history. Dr. Chen stood in her laboratory, surrounded by thousands of ceramic shards that told the story of humanity's lost chapter. Each fragment bore witness to minds capable of abstract thought, mathematical reasoning, and global communication, capabilities that challenged every assumption about human cognitive development. The patterns in the clay weren't just decorative. They were messages from a vanished world, encoded instructions waiting patiently through deep time for someone to finally understand their significance. But if these ceramic fragments revealed a global network of mathematical knowledge, what other traces might this lost civilization have left behind? As researchers began to examine the world's oldest myths and legends with fresh eyes, they would discover that some stories, passed down through countless generations, might not be stories at all. The ceramic fragments with their encoded mathematical patterns were compelling evidence of an ancient global civilization, but they remained silent about one crucial question. How had knowledge of such sophistication survived the apparent catastrophe that erased this lost world? The answer, researchers would discover, lay hidden not in artifacts buried in the earth, but in something far more durable: the very words we speak and the stories we tell. Dr. Linguistics Professor Margaret O'Sullivan from Trinity College, Dublin, had spent decades studying the deep roots of Indo-European languages, tracing words back to their earliest origins. But when she began applying her expertise to the mystery of the ancient ceramic civilization, she uncovered linguistic patterns that defied conventional understanding of how languages evolve and spread. Working with computational linguist Dr. Erik Lindqvist from the University of Stockholm, O'Sullivan discovered that words related to cosmic measurement, astronomical observation, and advanced mathematics shared remarkably similar root structures across language families that supposedly had no contact for tens of thousands of years. Celtic, Norse, Sanskrit, and even isolated languages from the Americas all contained virtually identical terms for complex astronomical phenomena. Words that describe celestial mechanics with precision that shouldn't have existed in prehistoric vocabularies. The Celtic word eimsir, meaning both time and weather, shared an uncanny linguistic DNA with the Norse ars, the Sanskrit kala, and dozens of other terms across unrelated language families. These weren't simple borrowings or coincidental evolution. They represented the fossilized remains of a sophisticated technical vocabulary that had somehow survived the collapse of the civilization that created it. The linguistic evidence became even more compelling when O'Sullivan and Lindqvist began examining mythological narratives alongside their word root analysis. Celtic mythology, with its rich tradition of oral storytelling preserved across millennia, contained references to Anchea Dawain, the first people, who possessed knowledge of the stars and could measure time itself. These weren't vague creation myths, but detailed accounts that described astronomical phenomena with startling accuracy. The Irish Lebor Gabala Eren, or Book of Invasions, spoke of ancient inhabitants who understood the Great Wheel of Time and could predict celestial events generations in advance. When Dr. O'Sullivan cross-referenced these descriptions with actual astronomical data, she discovered that the mythological accounts accurately described complex phenomena like the precession of equinoxes, a 26,000-year cycle that requires centuries of careful observation to detect and understand. Similarly, Norse mythology preserved in the prose, Edda contained the concept of Ragnarok, not just as a simple end-times prophecy, but as a cyclical event that had occurred before and would occur again. The descriptions of this catastrophic cycle included details that matched geological evidence of massive climate disruptions. The sun turns black, Earth sinks into the sea, the hot stars down from heaven, our world. These weren't poetic metaphors, but preserved memories of actual environmental catastrophes encoded in mythological language. Most intriguingly, both Celtic and Norse traditions preserved identical mathematical concepts in their sacred narratives. Both cultures spoke of 9 worlds or realms, both emphasized the significance of certain astronomical numbers, and both maintained calendar systems based on sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics. The mathematical parallels between Celtic and Norse mythologies revealed something extraordinary. Both cultures had preserved identical systems for measuring cosmic time that required generations of astronomical observation to develop. The Celtic concept of the Moore cycle, great cycles of time lasting thousands of years, corresponded precisely with Norse descriptions of cosmic ages, each ending in catastrophic renewal. Dr. Astrid Johansson from the University of Bergen made a breakthrough when she realized that these weren't separate mythological traditions, but fragments of a single, much older knowledge system that had been preserved by survivors of some ancient catastrophe. Her analysis of runic inscriptions and Celtic Ogham stones revealed that both writing systems contained numerical notations for tracking celestial events with remarkable precision. The evidence suggested that when the advanced ceramic civilization collapsed around 140,000 years ago, small groups of survivors had carried fragments of their sophisticated knowledge into the post-catastrophe world. Unable to maintain the complex technological infrastructure of their lost civilization, they encoded crucial information into the only storage system guaranteed to survive: a human memory expressed through myth, ritual, and sacred language. These survivor communities became the seed cultures that would eventually give rise to the Celtic and Norse peoples, but they carried within their oral traditions the genetic memory of their technologically advanced ancestors. The mythological first people weren't supernatural beings, but actual historical populations whose capabilities had been so far beyond their descendants' experience that they were remembered as gods or otherworldly entities. The preservation of advanced astronomical knowledge within mythological frameworks revealed the true genius of these ancient survivors. They had solved an impossible problem: how to maintain complex scientific information across generations without written records, technological infrastructure, or formal educational institutions. The answer lay in transforming data into story, encoding precise measurements within memorable narratives that could survive the collapse of civilizations. Dr. O'Sullivan's team discovered that Celtic and Norse oral traditions contained what amounted to sophisticated mnemonic devices, stories structured to preserve specific numerical relationships, astronomical cycles, and mathematical principles. The tale of the Norse world tree Yggdrasil, for instance, wasn't just mythology but a complex astronomical model that encoded the relationships between planetary orbits, stellar precession, and calendar calculations. These mythological preservation systems proved remarkably effective. While the ceramic civilization's physical infrastructure had crumbled to dust, its intellectual achievements survived for over 140,000 years, passed down through countless generations of storytellers who may not have fully understood the scientific significance of the tales they preserved. The implications were staggering. If advanced knowledge could survive such vast spans of time embedded within mythology, what other scientific achievements might be hidden within the world's oldest stories? As researchers began examining these linguistic and mythological patterns more closely, they would discover that the survival of ancient knowledge was only part of the story. Because the catastrophe that destroyed the ceramic civilization left scars that were still visible in the geological record, waiting to tell the tale of humanity's first great extinction event. The mythological memories preserved in Celtic and Norse traditions spoke of catastrophic cycles, of worlds ending in fire and darkness before being reborn. For generations, scholars dismissed these as poetic metaphors, symbolic representations of seasonal change or spiritual transformation. But when glaciologist Dr. Rachel Morrison began analyzing ice cores extracted from the depths of the Greenland ice sheet, she discovered that these ancient stories weren't metaphors at all. They were eyewitness accounts of humanity's darkest hour. Deep within the crystalline layers of ancient ice, Morrison's team found evidence of an event so catastrophic that it nearly erased human civilization from the face of the Earth. The ice cores, each layer representing a single year of snowfall, stretching back hundreds of thousands of years, contained a distinct signature dated to approximately 140,000 years ago, a spike of cosmic debris, pulverized rock, and atmospheric particulates unlike anything in the geological record. The evidence pointed to a single terrifying conclusion. A massive asteroid, perhaps a kilometer in diameter, had struck northwestern Greenland with the force of 1,000,000 hydrogen bombs. The impact had created what is now known as the Hiawatha crater, a 31-kilometer-wide scar hidden beneath the ice sheet that represented ground zero of a global extinction event. But this wasn't just another cosmic collision. The timing coincided perfectly with the sudden disappearance of the advanced ceramic civilization whose sophisticated pottery had been found across the globe. The reconstruction of that ancient apocalypse reads like humanity's most terrifying nightmare made real. At 11:47 a.m., on a day 140,000 years ago, the sky above Greenland began to burn. The asteroid, traveling at 20 kilometers per second, punched through Earth's atmosphere in less than 3 seconds, its surface temperature reaching 6,000 degrees Celsius, hotter than the surface of the Sun. The impact released energy equivalent to 58 million megatons of TNT, instantly vaporizing millions of tons of ice, rock, and organic matter. The initial fireball expanded outward at supersonic speeds, creating a hemisphere of plasma 50 kilometers in diameter that incinerated everything within a 500-kilometer radius. But the immediate devastation was only the beginning. The impact ejected billions of tons of pulverized rock and ice into the upper atmosphere, creating a debris cloud that began circling the globe within hours. Seismic waves from the collision triggered volcanic eruptions across the planet as tectonic plates shifted under the enormous shock. Dr. Morrison's ice core analysis revealed the horrifying timeline of what followed. Within days, global temperatures plummeted as the debris cloud blocked incoming solar radiation. The ceramic civilization, with its sophisticated pottery workshops and global trade networks, found itself suddenly plunged into a nuclear winter that would last for years. Agricultural systems collapsed, trade routes became impassable, and the carefully maintained knowledge centers that had preserved advanced mathematics and astronomy for millennia began to crumble as their populations struggled simply to survive. The years following the impact became a cascade of interconnected disasters that pushed human civilization to the brink of extinction. As global temperatures dropped by an average of 12 degrees Celsius, ice sheets began advancing rapidly from the polar regions. The sophisticated coastal settlements where the ceramic civilization had flourished found themselves buried under advancing glaciers or abandoned as sea levels dropped dramatically, exposing vast continental shelves but rendering established harbors useless. Paleoclimatologist Dr. James Chen's computer models of the post-impact climate revealed the true scope of the catastrophe. The debris cloud didn't just block sunlight, it triggered a feedback loop of environmental collapse. Reduced solar radiation killed vegetation across vast areas, which in turn reduced the planet's ability to absorb carbon dioxide. Ocean currents, disrupted by the massive injection of fresh water from melting Greenland ice, began to shut down, creating dead zones where marine life collapsed entirely. The ice core evidence showed that this environmental hell persisted for nearly a decade. Layers of ash and cosmic debris appear year after year in the geological record, interspersed with evidence of massive forest fires as dried vegetation ignited from lightning strikes in the electrically charged, particle-laden atmosphere. The sophisticated ceramic workshops that had produced mathematically precise pottery fell silent. The trade networks that had connected continents were severed as communities turned inward, focused solely on survival. Most haunting of all were the population bottlenecks visible in the ice core data, isotope ratios that suggested human numbers crashed to perhaps fewer than 10,000 individuals worldwide. The genetic evidence recovered from ice core microorganisms painted a picture of humanity balanced on the knife's edge of extinction. Those few thousand survivors scattered across the globe in isolated pockets represented the entirety of human genetic diversity. They huddled in caves, struggled to maintain fire in the endless twilight, and watched their sophisticated civilization crumble into memory and myth. Yet somehow, impossibly, they endured. The survivors who had once created precision ceramics and maintained global trade networks now focused their ingenuity on a single, desperate goal: preserving fragments of their lost knowledge for future generations. Unable to maintain the technological infrastructure needed for advanced pottery or metallurgy, They encoded their most crucial insights into the only storage medium guaranteed to survive: human memory itself. The Norse myths of Ragnarök, with their descriptions of the sun turning black and the earth sinking into the sea, weren't prophecies of a future apocalypse, but traumatic memories of this actual catastrophe, passed down through 140,000 years of oral tradition. The Celtic stories of the first people weren't fantasies but historical accounts of the pre-impact civilization, preserved by survivors who remembered when humanity had reached heights of knowledge and sophistication that seemed godlike to their descendants. As the nuclear winter gradually lifted and Earth's climate began to stabilize, these scattered survivor communities faced an enormous challenge: how to rebuild civilization with only fragments of their former knowledge. What they accomplished in the millennia that followed would create mysteries that persist to this day, hidden beneath rising seas. The survivors of the Great Impact had endured the nuclear winter, preserved fragments of their knowledge in myth and memory, and slowly began the monumental task of rebuilding civilization. But as Earth's climate stabilized and the ice sheets began their inevitable retreat, these recovering communities made a fateful decision that would hide their greatest achievements beneath hundreds of feet of seawater for the next 140,000 years. Marine archaeologist Dr. Sophie Hartwell had spent her career exploring shipwrecks and ancient harbors, but nothing had prepared her for what sonar mapping revealed beneath the North Sea in 2019. Working from the research vessel Cousteau, her team was conducting routine surveys of Doggerland, the vast landmass that once connected Britain to continental Europe before rising seas claimed it 8,000 years ago. What they discovered challenged everything archaeologists thought they knew about post-glacial human settlement. The sonar images showed geometric structures of impossible regularity scattered across the seafloor. Not the random debris of natural geological processes, but the unmistakable signatures of deliberate construction. Long, straight lines that could only be roads or canals, circular formations that suggested planned settlements, and most remarkably, what appeared to be harbor installations, with carefully engineered breakwaters and docking facilities, all lying beneath 120 feet of North Sea water. But Doggerland was only the beginning. Similar discoveries were emerging from survey work conducted across the Bering Land Bridge, where the seafloor between Alaska and Siberia held secrets that would rewrite the story of human migration and technological development. Dr. Marcus Chen's expedition to the Bering Sea had originally focused on studying ancient migration routes, but his team's high-resolution multi-beam sonar revealed something extraordinary beneath the waves. The seafloor between Alaska and Siberia, submerged when glacial meltwater raised global sea levels by over 400 feet, contained the remains of what could only be described as urban planning on a massive scale. The structures weren't random settlements scattered across the landscape, but carefully organized communities connected by an intricate network of canals and waterways. The sonar mapping revealed harbor systems with stone quays and breakwaters, residential districts laid out in geometric patterns, and what appeared to be industrial zones with large rectangular foundations. Most remarkably, the engineering showed clear evidence of hydraulic management, sophisticated drainage systems, and water control mechanisms that suggested these communities had mastered large-scale civil engineering. Radiocarbon dating of organic materials recovered from the sites confirmed what the geological evidence had already suggested. These underwater cities had been constructed during the warming period following the Great Impact, when survivors of the ceramic civilization had rebuilt their communities on the exposed continental shelves. As ice sheets melted and sea levels rose, these carefully planned settlements had been gradually abandoned, their inhabitants retreating to higher ground as the waters claimed their harbors, workshops, and homes. The architectural evidence revealed communities that had not merely survived the post-impact catastrophe, but had thrived, developing new technologies and urban planning concepts that wouldn't appear in the archaeological record again for tens of thousands of years. The underwater archaeology revealed engineering capabilities that seemed to leap directly from the advanced ceramic civilization into these post-catastrophe communities. Dr. Hartwell's detailed analysis of the North Sea structures showed evidence of concrete-like building materials, sophisticated cement mixtures that had somehow been developed without the industrial infrastructure that conventional history associates with such technology. Core samples revealed that these ancient builders had mastered hydraulic cement, creating underwater foundations that remained structurally sound after 140,000 years of submersion. Even more remarkable were the canal systems that connected different settlement areas. These weren't simple irrigation channels, but precisely engineered waterways with controlled flow rates, lock mechanisms for managing water levels, and distribution networks that suggested centralized planning on a regional scale. The engineering required not just advanced mathematical knowledge, but also sophisticated understanding of hydrology, materials science, and large-scale project management. The most puzzling discovery came from deep-sea archaeological robots that explored the largest underwater site in the Bering Sea. The settlement covered nearly 50 square kilometers and showed evidence of industrial activity that included what appeared to be large-scale manufacturing facilities. Stone foundations revealed the footprints of workshops that had processed raw materials on an almost modern scale, with specialized areas for different types of production and carefully planned transportation networks to move goods between facilities. These weren't the desperate survival settlements one might expect from catastrophe refugees, but thriving communities that had not only preserved the knowledge of their ancestors, but had continued to innovate and develop new technologies. The scale and sophistication of these underwater civilizations suggested something profound. The survivors hadn't just preserved fragments of their ancestors' knowledge, they had successfully reconstituted an advanced technological society. The cities beneath the waves represented humanity's second golden age, a remarkable renaissance that emerged from the ashes of the great catastrophe. But perhaps most haunting was the evidence of their deliberate abandonment. Unlike cities destroyed by war or natural disaster, these settlements showed clear signs of organized evacuation. Tools and personal belongings had been carefully removed, valuable materials salvaged, and structures systematically decommissioned. The inhabitants had watched the rising waters claim their harbors and neighborhoods, but they had departed with dignity and planning, carrying their accumulated knowledge to new homes on higher ground. Dr. Hartwell stood on the deck of her research vessel, watching sonar images of a drowned metropolis scroll. Across her monitors, each geometric outline on the seafloor represented years of human labor, dreams of prosperity, and communities that had thrived for millennia before the inexorable rise of post-glacial seas forced their abandonment. These underwater cities were monuments to human resilience, proof that civilization could not only survive apocalyptic catastrophe, but could rebuild itself with even greater sophistication. Yet the drowning of these remarkable settlements had scattered their inhabitants across the globe once again, carrying with them traditions, technologies, and stories that would seed the development of cultures in every corner of the world. What artistic and intellectual treasures had these displaced communities preserved as they established new homes on dry land? As the drowned cities' inhabitants dispersed across the continents, carrying with them the accumulated knowledge of two civilizations, they faced an urgent challenge: how to preserve their sophisticated understanding of mathematics, astronomy, and engineering without the urban infrastructure that had previously supported formal education and knowledge transmission. The answer they developed would create one of archaeology's most enduring mysteries: a global network of cave paintings that served as humanity's first universities. Dr. Maria Gonzalez from the International Cave Art Research Consortium had spent decades studying Paleolithic art, but it wasn't until she began examining cave paintings through the lens of the underwater city's discovery that their true purpose became clear. Working with mathematical anthropologist Dr. David Chen and astronomer Dr. Sarah Kim, Gonzalez launched the most comprehensive analysis of cave art ever undertaken, examining sites from the famous paintings of Lascaux in France to the remote caves of Sulawesi in Indonesia. What they discovered revolutionized understanding of Paleolithic human capabilities. The cave paintings weren't random artistic expressions or simple hunting magic. They were sophisticated educational tools, carefully designed curricula that preserved and transmitted complex knowledge across generations. The famous horses and bison of Lascaux, when examined alongside the geometric symbols that surrounded them, revealed themselves as components of an intricate star map that accurately depicted celestial configurations from 40,000 years ago. But the real breakthrough came when the team began comparing cave art motifs across continents, searching for patterns that might indicate shared knowledge systems. The comparative analysis revealed patterns that defied conventional understanding of Paleolithic cultural development. Identical geometric motifs appeared in caves separated by thousands of miles and supposedly isolated by geography and time. The spiral configurations found in Lascaux matched precisely with those discovered in the caves of Altamira in Spain, Cueva de las Manos in Argentina, and the Maros Pankep region of Indonesia. These weren't stylistic influences transmitted through trade or migration. They were exact mathematical reproductions of the same stellar configurations and geometric theorems. Dr. Chen's mathematical analysis of the cave art symbols revealed their true sophistication. The spirals encoded the golden ratio with precision to the third decimal place. The dot patterns represented prime number sequences. The animal figures, when their proportions were measured, demonstrated advanced understanding of geometric relationships that wouldn't be formally described by mathematicians until the Renaissance. Most remarkably, the positioning of symbols within the caves followed astronomical alignments that corresponded to specific stellar observations from the time period when the paintings were created. The caves had functioned as classrooms where knowledge keepers taught essential information to carefully selected students. The paintings served as visual textbooks, with each symbol and figure representing a specific lesson in mathematics, astronomy, or engineering. The remote locations and difficult access to many cave art sites suggested that this education was deliberately exclusive. Advanced knowledge was being preserved by initiated communities who understood its value and their responsibility as guardians of human intellectual achievement. The International Cave Art Research Consortium's global database revealed the true scope of this ancient knowledge preservation network. Over 400 cave sites across 6 continents contained identical mathematical and astronomical symbols, suggesting a coordinated effort to distribute essential knowledge across the widest possible geographic area. The cave art represented humanity's first backup system, a redundant network of information storage designed to ensure that crucial knowledge would survive even if individual communities were destroyed by natural disasters or other catastrophes. Dr. Kim's astronomical analysis provided the most compelling evidence of the cave's educational function. The star maps painted on cave ceilings weren't decorative. They were precise instructional diagrams that taught observers how to track celestial movements for navigation, calendar keeping, and agricultural timing. The paintings included sophisticated techniques for calculating planetary positions, predicting eclipses, and measuring the precession of equinoxes, astronomical knowledge that required generations of careful observation to develop. Perhaps most remarkably, the cave art contained what appeared to be standardized notation systems, symbolic languages that allowed complex mathematical and scientific concepts to be recorded and transmitted without written text. These notation systems appeared consistently across cave sites worldwide, suggesting that the knowledge keepers had developed a universal scientific language that transcended local cultural and linguistic differences. The evidence painted a picture of a remarkable educational infrastructure. Displaced survivors of the drowned cities had established a global network of learning centers hidden in remote caves where their precious knowledge could be safely preserved and transmitted to future generations. The Cave Art Network represented one of humanity's greatest intellectual achievements, a distributed university system that operated for thousands of years, preserving and transmitting knowledge across vast distances and through dramatic environmental changes. The knowledge keepers had solved a fundamental problem of civilization: how to maintain continuity of learning when political structures collapse, cities are abandoned, and populations scatter. These underground sanctuaries became the bridges between humanity's lost golden ages and its eventual renaissance. The mathematical principles encoded in cave paintings would eventually resurface in the architecture of Egyptian pyramids, Greek temples, and medieval cathedrals. The astronomical knowledge preserved in Stone Age star maps would guide Polynesian navigators across the Pacific and help Mayan astronomers calculate celestial cycles with extraordinary precision. Dr. Gonzalez stood in the depths of Lascaux, her headlamp illuminating 17,000-year-old paintings that suddenly made perfect sense as components of an advanced curriculum. The horses weren't just artistic expression, they were mnemonic devices for remembering star positions. The geometric patterns weren't decoration, they were mathematical theorems waiting to be rediscovered by future civilizations. The cave art revealed that knowledge once created never truly dies. It transforms, adapts, and finds new vessels for survival. The memory keepers had ensured that humanity's greatest intellectual achievements would endure not in monuments of stone or metal, but in the most durable medium of all, the human mind itself. But preserving knowledge was only half the battle. The question remained, what biological evidence existed to trace the actual lineages of these knowledge keepers as they spread across the globe? The cave paintings had revealed a sophisticated network of knowledge preservation, but they left crucial questions unanswered. Who exactly were these memory keepers, and how had they managed to coordinate their efforts across vast distances? The answers lay hidden not in ancient art or archaeological artifacts, but in the most intimate record of human history, the genetic code itself. Dr. Rebecca Singh from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology had revolutionized the field of ancient DNA analysis, developing techniques that could extract and sequence genetic material from samples tens of thousands of years old. When she began applying these methods to investigate the mysterious population movements that coincided with the post-catastrophe period, she uncovered genetic evidence that would fundamentally change understanding of human survival strategies during Earth's darkest hours. The DNA told a story of remarkable organization and planning. Rather than the random genetic drift one would expect from scattered disaster survivors, Singh's analysis revealed clear signatures of deliberate population management. Genetic markers showed that specific family lineages had been systematically distributed across continents, creating redundant genetic reservoirs that ensured the survival of particular knowledge-carrying bloodlines, even if individual communities were destroyed. Most intriguingly, the genetic data revealed mysterious admixture events, periods when previously isolated populations suddenly began interbreeding in patterns that suggested coordinated meetings rather than random encounters. These genetic convergences coincided precisely with the timeframes when cave art appeared in new regions, suggesting that the memory keepers were not only preserving knowledge but actively spreading it through carefully planned genetic and cultural exchanges. The ancient DNA sequencing revealed population bottlenecks that told a chilling story of near extinction followed by remarkably rapid recovery. Dr. Singh's analysis showed that human genetic diversity had crashed to catastrophically low levels around 140,000 years ago, consistent with the timeline of the Great Impact, but then rebounded with unusual speed and geographic distribution. This wasn't the random recovery pattern typical of natural population expansion, but showed clear evidence of coordinated migration and settlement strategies. Working with population geneticist Dr. James Morrison from Harvard Medical School, Singh identified specific genetic lineages that appeared to have been deliberately preserved and distributed across multiple continents. These founder lineages carried distinctive markers that suggested they had been selected not randomly, but based on specific criteria, possibly including cognitive abilities, technical skills, or even genetic predispositions for memory and learning capacity. The genetic evidence revealed a sophisticated understanding of heredity that shouldn't have existed in prehistoric populations. The memory keepers appeared to have practiced selective breeding strategies designed to maintain and enhance intellectual capabilities across generations. Certain genetic variants associated with enhanced spatial reasoning, mathematical ability, and memory formation appeared in these founder lineages at frequencies far higher than would occur naturally. Most remarkably, the DNA analysis showed that these genetically selected lineages had maintained contact across vast distances for thousands of years after their initial dispersal. Periodic genetic exchanges between populations separated by oceans and continents suggested a coordinated network of knowledge keepers who understood that intellectual diversity required genetic diversity to survive. The genetic. Archaeology revealed something even more extraordinary. Evidence of what Dr. Singh termed cognitive inheritance patterns. The memory keeper lineages showed genetic variants that enhanced not just intellectual capability, but specific types of cognitive processing ideally suited for knowledge preservation. Enhanced pattern recognition abilities, superior spatial memory, and genetic predispositions for mathematical thinking appeared clustered in these bloodlines with statistical significance that ruled out random chance. Ancient DNA extracted from remains found near cave art sites confirmed that the artists and their communities carried these specialized genetic markers. The cave painters weren't random members of prehistoric tribes, but descendants of carefully selected lineages whose genetic inheritance had been shaped over generations to optimize their ability to preserve and transmit complex information. The memory keepers had essentially created a hereditary class of human libraries, genetically optimized for their crucial role as guardians of civilization's accumulated knowledge. Dr. Morrison's comparative genomics revealed that these enhanced cognitive traits hadn't emerged through natural selection alone. The genetic signatures suggested artificial selection, deliberate breeding strategies that had concentrated beneficial mutations and eliminated detrimental ones over thousands of years. The memory keepers had practiced a form of genetic engineering, using their understanding of heredity to create bloodlines specifically adapted for intellectual preservation tasks. The implications were staggering. The survivors of the Great Catastrophe hadn't just preserved their ancestors' knowledge, they had systematically enhanced their own species' cognitive capabilities to ensure that such knowledge could never again be completely lost to human forgetfulness or natural disaster. The genetic evidence painted a picture of humanity's most ambitious survival strategy, the deliberate evolution of cognitive enhancement to ensure the perpetual preservation of knowledge. These memory keeper lineages had become living repositories of human achievement, their very DNA optimized to carry forward the intellectual legacy of multiple civilizations across vast spans of time. Dr. Singh's final analysis revealed that these enhanced genetic lineages hadn't simply disappeared into history. Modern human populations still carried fragments of these optimized cognitive traits, diluted by tens of thousands of years of genetic mixing, but still detectable in certain family lines. Some contemporary populations showed statistical clustering of the same genetic variants that had appeared in the ancient memory keeper lineages. Mathematical geniuses, prodigious memorizers, and individuals with exceptional pattern recognition abilities might be carrying forward genetic gifts from humanity's darkest and most determined hour. The genome had become humanity's ultimate backup system, encoding not just biological information but the very capacity for preserving and transmitting knowledge across generations. The memory keepers had solved the fundamental problem of civilization, how to ensure that intellectual achievements survive even when the societies that created them collapse completely. But the genetic evidence raised a haunting question. If these enhanced lineages had been so carefully preserved and distributed globally, what had happened to them? Why had their remarkable cognitive abilities and knowledge preservation networks eventually faded from history? The answer lay buried in the ice of humanity's final refuge, where the last of the memory keepers had made their desperate stand against the advancing cold. The genetically enhanced memory keeper lineages had spread across the globe, establishing their cave universities and preserving humanity's greatest intellectual achievements through the darkest periods of post-catastrophe recovery. But as Earth's climate entered another cooling phase around 70,000 years ago, these remarkable communities faced their greatest challenge yet: the advance of ice sheets that would force them into increasingly remote refugia until only one sanctuary remained. Dr. Elena Kowalski's expedition to the Canadian Arctic archipelago in 2021 was intended as a routine survey of permafrost conditions. But what her team discovered beneath the eternal ice would rewrite the final chapter of humanity's first great civilization. Using ground-penetrating radar to map subsurface conditions on remote Ellesmere Island, The team detected geometric anomalies buried beneath 200 feet of permafrost, structures too regular and extensive to be natural formations. The excavation that followed revealed the most remarkable archaeological site ever discovered, a vast underground complex that had been perfectly preserved in the Arctic ice for tens of thousands of years. The settlement extended for over 2 kilometers beneath the permafrost, consisting of interconnected tunnels, chambers, and workshops that showed clear evidence of advanced engineering and long-term habitation. But this wasn't a primitive Ice Age shelter. It was a sophisticated underground city that had housed what appeared to be the last surviving community of the Memory Keeper civilization. The preservation was extraordinary. Organic materials that would have decomposed millennia ago in any other environment remained intact in the permafrost. The organic materials told a story of ingenuity and desperation. Wooden tools showed evidence of sophisticated joinery techniques, while textile fragments revealed advanced weaving methods that produced insulation materials capable of maintaining warmth in subarctic conditions. But most remarkable were the preserved food stores, evidence of agricultural techniques that had somehow been adapted to function in underground growing chambers heated by geothermal energy. Dr. Kowalski's team discovered that the settlement's inhabitants had mastered geothermal engineering on a scale that rivaled modern technology. They had tapped into underground hot springs and volcanic vents, creating a network of heated tunnels and chambers that maintained livable temperatures even during the harshest Ice Age conditions. The engineering required precise understanding of geology, thermodynamics, and fluid mechanics, knowledge that represented the culmination of tens of thousands of years of accumulated scientific achievement. The workshop areas revealed the full scope of the Memory Keepers' final efforts. They had continued their knowledge preservation work even as they retreated to this ultimate refuge, creating increasingly sophisticated storage systems for their accumulated wisdom. Carved bone tablets contained mathematical notations, while intricately woven textiles served as three-dimensional maps encoding astronomical data. They had developed new methods for preserving information in materials that could survive indefinitely in the Arctic cold. Most poignantly, the archaeologists found evidence of a deliberate educational program. Teaching chambers contained carefully arranged learning materials, suggesting that even in their final isolation, the Memory Keepers had continued training new generations to carry forward their precious knowledge. The educational chambers revealed the Memory Keepers' final, desperate mission. They were preparing for their own extinction. The teaching materials weren't designed for a thriving community, but for a handful of survivors who would need to carry essential knowledge into an uncertain future. They had created condensed curricula, focusing on the most critical information needed to rebuild civilization from nothing. Basic metallurgy, agricultural techniques, mathematical principles, and astronomical knowledge that could guide navigation and calendar keeping. Carbon dating of the organic materials revealed the heartbreaking timeline of the sanctuary's final years. The community had survived in their underground refuge for nearly 3,000 years, maintaining their advanced technology and knowledge preservation systems even as the Ice Age tightened its grip on the surface world. But around 67,000 years ago, the site showed signs of gradual abandonment as the population dwindled and resources became increasingly scarce. The final chambers told the most poignant story of all. The Memory Keepers had made a last, extraordinary effort to ensure their knowledge would survive their community's extinction. They had created what archaeologists now call the Legacy Archive, a comprehensive collection of their most essential knowledge encoded in the most durable materials available. Stone tablets carved with fundamental mathematical principles, metal plates etched with star charts, and crystalline matrices that preserved astronomical calculations in virtually indestructible form. These final repositories were arranged with mathematical precision throughout the settlement, as if the Memory Keepers hoped that future archaeologists would eventually discover them and decode their accumulated wisdom. The Legacy Archive represented humanity's most profound act of faith, a belief that someday someone would find these carefully preserved treasures and understand their significance. The Memory Keepers had arranged their final knowledge repositories like a message in a bottle cast into the ocean of time, hoping that future generations would possess the wisdom to decode their gifts. But perhaps the most haunting discovery was the evidence of the community's final days. Personal belongings remained arranged as if their owners had simply stepped away temporarily. A child's carved toy left beside a sleeping area, tools carefully cleaned and stored for use that would never come, cooking fires that had been methodically extinguished one last time. The memory keepers had faced their extinction with dignity, ensuring that their sanctuary would serve as a time capsule, preserving not just their knowledge, but their humanity. Dr. Kowalski found herself profoundly moved as she documented the settlement's final chambers. These weren't the desperate refugees of a dying civilization, but the carefully maintained libraries of humanity's most dedicated teachers, who had chosen to preserve knowledge rather than simply survive. They had transformed their isolation into opportunity, their approaching extinction into a gift for the future. The last sanctuary had finally revealed its secrets after 67,000 years of Arctic silence. But the memory keeper's story was part of a much larger pattern, one that would challenge everything we thought we knew about the cyclical nature of human civilization and the eternal spiral of knowledge, loss, and rediscovery that defined our species' deepest history. The discovery of the Arctic sanctuary marked the end of one chapter in humanity's story. But as Dr. Kowalski examined the patterns emerging from decades of research, she began to recognize something both beautiful and terrifying. The memory keepers weren't unique. They were part of an ancient rhythm that had governed human civilization for hundreds of thousands of years. A cosmic metronome of rise, flourishing, catastrophe, and rebirth that pulsed through geological time with the regularity of a heartbeat. Climatologist Dr. James Ndovu from the University of Cape Town had spent his career studying the relationship between climate cycles and human development. But when he began correlating his data with the archaeological discoveries of the ceramic civilization, the underwater cities, and the Arctic sanctuary, a pattern emerged that sent chills through the scientific community. Every major climate transition, every ice age, every warming period, every catastrophic shift in Earth's environmental systems coincided with evidence of civilizational collapse followed by mysterious technological renaissance. The pattern was so consistent it seemed almost programmed into the planet's very functioning. Civilizations would rise, develop sophisticated technologies and knowledge systems, then face extinction through climate catastrophe or cosmic impact. The survivors would preserve fragments of their achievements, rebuild in new environments, and eventually develop their own advanced societies, only to face the same cyclical destruction when Earth's climate shifted again. It was as if the planet itself were breathing, and with each breath, human civilization died and was reborn. Dr. Ndovu's climate models revealed the terrifying regularity of these cycles. Every 100,000 to 150,000 years, Earth experienced major climate transitions that created what he termed civilizational reset events. The Milankovitch cycles that governed ice ages, combined with periodic cosmic impacts and supervolcanic eruptions, created a planetary rhythm of destruction and renewal that had shaped human development since our species first achieved consciousness. But the most haunting evidence came from Africa itself, the cradle of humanity where oral traditions stretched back further than anywhere else on Earth. Working with anthropologist Dr. Amina Okafor from the University of Lagos, Ndovu discovered that African creation myths contained remarkably consistent descriptions of what they called the endless return, cycles of worlds that rose, flourished, and fell in patterns that matched precisely with the geological evidence of climate catastrophes. The Dogon people of Mali spoke of 7 previous worlds, each destroyed when the sky fell or the waters rose. The Yoruba traditions described cycles of creation and destruction governed by cosmic forces beyond human control. Most remarkably, the San people of the Kalahari preserved oral histories that described technological achievements from the time before the Great Cold, descriptions that included metalworking, large settlements, and knowledge of the stars that seemed to reference the ceramic civilization or even earlier lost cultures. These weren't vague mythological metaphors, but precise cultural memories that had been preserved through tens of thousands of years of oral transmission. The African oral traditions revealed a sophisticated understanding of deep time that Western science had only recently achieved. Elder storytellers spoke of the world that breathes, a living planet that underwent regular periods of sleep and awakening, destruction and renewal. During the sleeping periods, they explained, the old knowledge would be hidden beneath ice or water, waiting for the next awakening when it would be rediscovered by the children of survivors. Most profound were the Akan traditions of Ghana, which described humanity as the eternal students, doomed to learn the same lessons repeatedly because each generation forgot what their ancestors had known. Their creation stories spoke of advanced civilizations that had mastered fire, metal, and the movements of stars, only to lose everything when the earth grew angry and destroyed their cities with flood, earthquake, or cosmic fire. Dr. Okafor's linguistic analysis revealed that these stories contained technical vocabulary that suggested actual historical knowledge rather than mythological invention. Words for advanced metallurgy, astronomical phenomena, and engineering concepts appeared consistently across African languages that had been separated for tens of thousands of years. The precision of these technical terms suggested that the oral traditions were preserving actual memories of lost civilizations rather than creating fantastical narratives. The pattern was becoming undeniable. Humanity had achieved advanced civilization multiple times throughout its history, only to lose everything in recurring cycles of natural catastrophe. Each time, a few survivors preserved fragments of knowledge that would seed the next renaissance. The weight of this revelation settled over the research community like a profound melancholy. Humanity wasn't climbing a ladder of progress toward some ultimate destiny. It was walking an endless spiral, forever returning to the same achievements, the same discoveries, the same tragic losses. The ceramic civilization, the underwater cities, the memory keepers in their Arctic sanctuary. All were merely the most recent iterations of a story that had played out countless times before, and would play out countless times again. Dr. Ndovu stood in his Cape Town laboratory, surrounded by climate data spanning millions of years, and felt the crushing weight of cosmic time. The achievements that seemed so remarkable, advanced metallurgy, global trade networks, sophisticated astronomy, weren't unique human accomplishments but recurring themes in an eternal symphony of rise and fall. Somewhere in Earth's future lay another climate catastrophe that would erase our current civilization just as completely as the Great Impact had destroyed the ceramic cities. Yet within this cosmic melancholy lay a strange comfort. The African elders had been right. Humanity was eternal, not in its individual achievements, but in its capacity for renewal. Knowledge might be lost, but it would always be rediscovered. Civilizations might fall, but new ones would always rise from their ashes. The spiral turned endlessly, but it turned upward, each cycle building upon the hidden foundations of those that came before. As Dr. Ndovu contemplated humanity's cyclical fate, he began to understand that perhaps the pattern itself held the key to transcending it. As the full scope of humanity's cyclical journey through time became clear, Dr. Ndovu found himself standing at the threshold of a profound realization. The pattern of rise, fall, and renewal wasn't humanity's curse, it was its greatest gift. Each cycle carried forward invisible seeds from the previous one, fragments of knowledge and wisdom that never truly disappeared but transformed, adapted, and found new expression in each renaissance. Walking through the streets of modern Cape Town, Ndovu began to see the ancient echoes everywhere. The geometric patterns that adorned contemporary African architecture weren't new artistic innovations but unconscious recreations of mathematical principles first discovered by the ceramic civilization 150,000 years ago. The golden ratio that appeared in Gothic cathedrals, Islamic mosques, and Hindu temples wasn't humanity's recent discovery of aesthetic harmony. It was the same proportion that had guided the pottery makers whose work now lay scattered beneath ocean sediments. The spiral staircase in his university's astronomy building followed the same mathematical curves that had been carved into bone tablets in the Arctic sanctuary. The star charts used by modern astronomers to map celestial movements unknowingly replicated observations that had been painted on cave walls by the memory keepers tens of thousands of years earlier. Humanity hadn't forgotten its ancient wisdom. It had absorbed it so completely that it seemed to arise spontaneously from each new generation's consciousness. The transcendence lay not in escaping the cycle, but in recognizing it. Modern quantum physicists working on theories of multiple dimensions unknowingly echoed concepts that had been encoded in ancient cave paintings. The spiral galaxies that astronomers observed through powerful telescopes matched the mathematical spirals that prehistoric artists had carved into stone monuments. The DNA double helix that geneticists had discovered in the 20th century followed the same helical patterns that had appeared in textile designs from the drowned cities. Each technological breakthrough that seemed revolutionary was actually a rediscovery, a return to knowledge that had been achieved before and would be achieved again. The internet that connected global consciousness mirrored the cave art network that had linked the memory keepers across continents. Space exploration represented humanity's eternal urge to map the cosmos, the same drive that had led ancient astronomers to encode stellar positions in pottery fragments and stone circles. But perhaps most profound was the realization that humanity's spiritual traditions carried the deepest echoes of all. The concept of eternal return found in Buddhism, the cyclical time of Hinduism, the resurrection mythology of Christianity, all preserved cultural memories of actual historical cycles when civilizations had died and been reborn. Prayer wheels, medicine wheels, and labyrinthine patterns in spiritual traditions worldwide all reflected the same spiral geometry that governed everything from galactic structure to DNA formation. The ancient knowledge wasn't lost. It lived within the human spirit itself, encoded in our deepest instincts and most fundamental patterns of thought. Dr. Ndovu understood now why the memory keepers had fought so desperately to preserve their knowledge and why they had ultimately succeeded in ways they could never have imagined. They hadn't just saved information. They had planted seeds of consciousness that would bloom across geological time. Every human who gazed at the stars and felt a sense of cosmic connection was experiencing an inherited memory from ancestors who had mapped those same constellations 100,000 years ago. The spiral pattern wasn't just a mathematical concept or artistic motif. It was the fundamental shape of existence itself, the geometry that connected quantum particles to galactic clusters, DNA molecules to the structure of time. Humanity was discovering that it lived within an infinite spiral where past and future touched at every moment, where ancient wisdom and future revelation were merely different faces of the same eternal truth. This recognition brought with it a profound responsibility. If knowledge was truly immortal, if each civilization was simply rediscovering what had been known before, then humanity's current achievements weren't just for this moment. They were contributions to an eternal library that would survive whatever catastrophes lay ahead. Every scientific discovery, every artistic creation, every moment of human wisdom was being added to the spiral, becoming part of the pattern that would guide future renaissance. The researchers working to decode the ceramic fragments weren't just archaeologists uncovering the past, they were memory keepers themselves, continuing the same mission that had driven their predecessors through ice ages and catastrophes. Standing beneath the southern hemisphere's star-filled sky, Dr. Ndovu felt the presence of countless generations who had looked up at these same constellations and experienced the same sense of wonder, the same intuitive understanding that they were part of something infinitely larger than themselves. The ceramic artists, the underwater city builders, the memory keepers in their Arctic sanctuary, all had gazed at these stars and recognized the eternal spiral that connected all things. The spiral of echoes was complete now, its pattern revealed across deep time. Humanity wasn't trapped in endless repetition, but was participating in a cosmic dance of consciousness, each generation adding its voice to an eternal song that grew richer and more complex with every cycle. The knowledge that seemed lost was never truly gone. It lived in the golden ratio of a nautilus shell, in the spiral arms of distant galaxies, in the double helix of life itself. Future civilizations would rediscover these same truths, would uncover their own forgotten cities, would decode their own ancient mysteries, and they too would realize that they were not the first to walk this path, nor would they be the last. The spiral would continue turning, carrying forward the echoes of all who had contributed to humanity's eternal quest for understanding. In recognizing the pattern, humanity had transcended it. The spiral of echoes would spiral on forever, each turn bringing the species closer to a wisdom that was both eternally new and infinitely ancient. The understanding that consciousness itself was the universe coming to know itself through cycles of forgetting and remembering that would never end. Epilogue: the endless sleep. And so we come to the end of our journey through the spiral of echoes, though perhaps end is not the right word for something that has no true beginning or conclusion. We have traveled together through deep time, witnessed the rise and fall of forgotten civilizations, and discovered that humanity's story is far older and more mysterious than we ever dared imagine. The ceramic artists who encoded mathematical secrets in their pottery, the survivors who preserved knowledge in cave paintings across continents, the memory keepers who made their final stand in the Arctic ice. All of them understood what we are only now beginning to grasp: that consciousness itself is eternal, that knowledge once born can never truly die, only transform and return in new forms. As you settle into sleep tonight, let your mind drift with the rhythm of the spiral. Feel yourself becoming part of that ancient pattern, your dreams joining the eternal dance of forgetting and remembering that has guided our species through countless cycles of darkness and light. The same stars that watched over the drowned cities now watch over you. The same cosmic forces that shaped those forgotten civilizations continue to shape your thoughts and dreams. Close your eyes and listen. Can you hear it? The whisper of ancient knowledge flowing through your bloodstream, the echo of stellar configurations painted on cave walls, the gentle murmur of mathematical truths that have been rediscovered again and again across the turning of ages. You are not separate from this story. You are part of it, a living continuation of humanity's eternal quest for understanding. Let the spiral carry you into peaceful sleep, knowing that your dreams tonight join an infinite library of human consciousness that spans geological time. Rest now and become part of the endless, eternal spiral of echoes. Sweet dreams, fellow traveler through time.